Now to an exclusive up right now at the Heartland Post, heartlandpost.com. The Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, great friends of the Dan O'Donnell Show, has put together a new report that argues that the state's stagnant reading scores and ongoing teacher shortages stem from the same basic root problem: inconsistent preparation of new teachers in how to teach reading. The report is titled "The Fort Gap: How Inconsistent Teacher Preparation is Fueling Wisconsin's Literacy and Educator Crises." This is the opening of a broader initiative called the Wisconsin Education Comeback, a Roadmap for Student Success. Now, the first report centers on FORT, the Foundations of Reading test. Wisconsin requires for licensure in elementary and middle school education, childhood, adolescent education, special ed. It's designed to confirm that someone who wants to be a teacher understands the 5 components of evidence-based reading instruction: phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. And Will says, look, we can look at the passage rates of this test as something of a window into how well we're doing preparing these teachers to actually teach students. And if you don't have teachers who have a good basis in these fundamental things, how can you possibly expect them to teach? It is absolutely fascinating. And I am honored to be joined now by Will's Research Director, Will Flanders. Will, be honest with me. Did you take the job at Will because your name is Will?
That might have been a part of it. It's why they just call me Flanders around the office.
Okay, I was going to say, is it ever confusing when someone's calling your name and everybody looks up and says yes? This is a fascinating. I don't say this because you're on my show, but I got this report and said, I never would have thought of this. We always talk about, especially in inner city education, some of the big problems. I have been for a decade now talking about and harping on dysfunction in the classroom and how it's impossible to learn if you've got kids who are, being not just rowdy, but violent in class. And instead of being suspended or expelled, they keep going back into the classroom. That's something I never would have said. Hey, you know what? We are on generation number 4 of people in Wisconsin who aren't particularly strong readers because this has been an ongoing problem. A certain percentage of those people are going into the teaching profession, and if they don't have a solid foundation in phonics and the basics of the English language, how are they supposed to teach it? It is a fascinating look at what's actually going on in these classrooms. So congratulations. This is a really groundbreaking report.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I definitely appreciate that. And it's sort of like a lot of our problems in society, right? It goes back to what are young adults being taught in our universities. Just like we've seen DEI and things like that spread from the universities to sort of envelop all of society, we've seen these bad reading practices start at the universities with, professors who glom on to the latest fad, and then they disseminate that to the next generation of teachers. And, as you said, we've been dealing with this for 20 or more years where teachers have been taught reading the wrong way. The Ford exam is, the good news is we have this test out there that teachers have to take, as you said at the beginning, that sort of measures the extent to which they're prepared to teach reading in a proper phonics-based science of reading way. But we see really wide variation across the state in the extent to which our teaching candidates are able to pass that test.
What is actually kind of amazing to me is some of the discrepancies in who is doing well on this test. I've, of course, got to brag as a proud alum of Marquette University, nearly 100% pass rate for new teachers who come out of the Marquette University education program. UW Eau Claire is at 92%, but you've got Mount Mary University, 45% of college graduates are passing this test. Milwaukee Teacher Education Center, 41%. That's troubling to say the least, and crisis level because a lot of the teachers, especially in Milwaukee, are going into schools where we most need to improve those scores.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And even some of our larger, universities like UW Milwaukee is only at a 71% passage rate.
Yeah.
And, you think about, when we talk about student debt and the fact, kids are coming out of college so in debt, if you can't pass that test, you can't teach. You're not allowed to be in the classroom. So we have 29% of kids that are going to UW Milwaukee, a major, Wisconsin university, that aren't able to be in the classroom because they can't pass this test. And, particularly with a school like UW Milwaukee, we're seeing a lot of those teachers, as you say, want to go into MPS, go into teaching in this area, a district where we have under 20% proficiency in reading. So it's just a sort of snowball effect, generation after generation, being failed by the universities, down to the teachers, down to the next generation of kids.
What do you think the biggest reason for this is? Do you think it's the university system? Do you think it's we've loosened standards? Do you? How do you fix this problem?
Well, when you look at our colleges of education, you get the folks that go into education at the university level. And I don't want to disparage everyone because there's obviously some good folks out there, but these are folks that are maybe many years removed from being in the classroom. And also we see, across the board in education schools across the country, they're very sort of, they like to glom on to the latest sort of fad.
Yep.
And moving away from phonics, moving towards these other, non-science of reading-based systems really was popular over the last 20 years. So you have a lot of professors in place that's the way they learned, and they're sort of attached to what they, what they've built their dissertation on, what they've written papers on, and they don't want to go back to this sort of basic stuff that the evidence shows works, but it doesn't align with what they've sort of learned in their decades of experience.
Well, and not only that, it's who's got the latest and greatest product to sell. Right. I mean, that's something that also
Absolutely.
Isn't really talked about, that the reason that a lot of these districts, DPI itself, has been careening from one model to the other is you have got people in the education sphere, and I'm not going to begrudge them for trying to make a living, but they are just radically remaking how we teach teaching, how we teach reading, right? How we do the, and instead of doing the stuff that has been proven to work for, I don't know, several centuries now, teaching the basic rules that, sort of underpin the English language, we're going to things that haven't been proven and aren't evidence-based, but they're the hot new thing. And I feel like that is a bigger factor than we might think. Is this also, therefore, a DPI and school district issue, not just an individual teacher issue?
I mean, it absolutely is a DPI and school district issue. What we've seen with the implementation of Act 20, the Science of Reading bill, is that, DPI has dragged their feet at every opportunity because the same sort of inertia towards not changing, towards not going back to the basics that we talked about just now in the university system, it has a hold on DPI as well. And, you have a union-controlled bureaucusy that doesn't want to have to change the way they've done things. And I think that's a story across the board in our education establishment.
Oh, that's a massive, that is a huge issue. And now we're seeing basically the Democrat establishment, from the Supreme Court to every single gubernatorial candidate at a recent forum, raise their hands when asked, are you going to repeal Act 10? The Supreme Court is probably going to do it for them before they even have a chance, if one of them, heaven forbid, is elected. The legislature, too. They want to hand even more power. They want to hand the keys to this state back to those exact same unions, educational bureaucrats who have repeatedly proven, by the way, that they are unfortunately not to be trusted. I need to look no further than the infamous water park retreat where they, massaged the standard. I mean, this, I can't believe, Will, and I don't want to, go too far afield here. I still cannot believe that the water park scandal is not a bigger scandal. That they were cooking the books on student test scores, on cut scores, to make it seem like students were doing a lot better. They do this at the Chula Vista Resort, spending $368,000 of our money. It's, okay, my family goes to the Dells like once, sometimes twice a year. I think we did the math on this. There were 88 attendees. It was something like $11,000 per attendee at the water park. I don't even think I would know how to spend $11,000 at a water park in the Dells. That's a massive.
Just a couple months there for that, I think, right?
What's that? Yeah, right. I mean, I would need to, like, I don't know, get a houseboat and start living in the wave pool to spend that amount of money. But this is the biggest. This to me is, and it again all sort of fits in, as you said, it all fits into, we have got an educational bureaucracy at both the K-12 level and at the college level that is less interested in turning out students who are going on to the next grade or going on to become teachers themselves, less interested in turning out proficient, competent people who can go in and immediately do the work at the level that's expected to them. And instead, a bureaucracy that is so self-serving that it just seeks to enhance its own money, power, and influence. And that's a big, big problem.
Yeah, and you can see the difference when we look at states like Mississippi, which we never thought, in Wisconsin, we'd be looking up towards Mississippi, right, as aspirational. But what they did is they got some actual reformers in place in their education establishment. They were able to wholesale make changes and actually go with what works rather than what the establishment wanted. And now when we look at fourth grade NAEP scores in reading, we're actually looking up at Mississippi, which, people like Chris Larson, when I testified, couldn't believe that was the case, but I showed him the data. He's like, no, we're actually looking up at Mississippi now. So.
In fact, a lot of states are. It's known as the Mississippi Miracle. And what they did is simply, A, going back to phonics-based reading education, and B, and this is the big one, if you can't pass, third grade going into fourth grade, if you can't pass a reading test, they hold you back. And there is no crying. There is no whining from the parents. You do not move on to the fourth grade. All right. And they say, look, if you don't have the basics by now, you need to get them because everything builds on it. And to have that, the stones, frankly, to do that, to stand up to parents and anybody else within the educational bureaucracy. Well, we can't, it's disparate impact. If we're holding too many black students back, we look like racists. Well, are they served by, we got the biggest racial disparities in student performance at the fourth grade level in the entire state. This to me is it's a complete no-brainer all the way around. I can't believe it either, but Wisconsin needs to follow Mississippi's model.
Yeah, for sure. And then, there are other states like Louisiana, there are other southern states that actually have, more friendly state governments in place across the board, shall we say, that are moving past this as well. So, the left likes to say we're some educational model up here, the progressive state, but we're falling to the bottom in terms of proficiency. And, when we're looking up at a state like Mississippi, you think that ought to spur some change across the board. With no insult to Mississippi,
right.
Of course,
but it's just,
bottom in education.
Yeah, forever Mississippi has been like dead last in everything. Right. It's like personal fitness, physical fitness, education, all of this. Minnesota is also a national laughingstock for completely different reasons. But Minnesota
will be heading there as well over this, like we are.
Yeah, exactly. But you know what? Kudos to them for saying, hey, here is a problem. Here is a clear fix. And we're going to do something about it. I think a great first step, Will, is this report identifying the problem. The Fort Gap, how inconsistent teacher preparation is fueling Wisconsin's literacy and educator crises. We have got a story on it up. We have got a link to the report up, heartlandpost.com. Will Flanders is the research director for Will, the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. Sir, always appreciate talking with you. Again, excellent report. Great job. And we do appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.